Hello, this is Mike, and welcome to another episode of Urban Legends and Mythology. In this episode, we are hitting the highways and byways, the old dark country roads, and the phantom ghost cars and hitchhikers who inhabit them. So let's crack open a cold one and dive right in. So stories of phantom or vanishing hitchhikers have been around for at least 400 years. One tale goes back to the 1600s. And the general gist of the story is very simple. You have a traveler who meets with a hitchhiker. Almost in all of these tales, it's usually a young woman who is offered a ride by the protagonist of the story. And upon our protagonist chauffeuring this passenger to her destination, she mysteriously disappears, usually from the moving vehicle. In some variations, they disappear during the trip. Other variations, they disappear once they reach their destination. It's usually a cemetery. And in some versions, they leave behind a trinket or some kind of clue as to who they were, and the protagonist usually follows this clue and comes across either the dead girl's parents or a burial site, a gravestone, etc., etc. And at this point, the protagonist learns the story that the girl had died in a tragic accident, usually by the roadside or usually while coming home, and that her spirit is essentially stuck in this loop, continuously seeking out these travelers to give her that final ride to her final destination. That's the general gist of the story, and this story has existed for centuries all over the world. However, it's most prevalent here in the United States just simply due to our car culture, which we'll get to later. So let's start at the beginning. And this time, the beginning is the first hitchhiker myth we see that was really written down somewhere, and it takes place in February of 1602, where a priest and two farmers were on their way home from the Candlemas market in Västergötland in Sweden. So while they're on their way home, they come across this maid, and she asks if she can accompany them on their journey. And this basically being three dudes on a road trip, they're like, yeah, the chick can come along, why not? So they stop at this inn and they get off the cart or whatever they're riding on, and they go in to get a bite to eat. And the maid accompanies them, and when they all get in and get settled down, the maid asks the innkeeper for a jug of beer. So the innkeeper, he goes and he fetches this jug of his finest beer. Now, it probably wasn't a Voodoo Ranger Tropical Force IPA, because I don't think they had IPAs back then, but in my story, it was something just as awesome. So the innkeeper comes back to the table with this jug, sets it down in front of the maid, and when they all go to drink from the jug, they realize that what is in the jug isn't beer at all. The beer had mysteriously turned back into malt, which is a cereal grain used in the brewing of beer. And they're all like, that's friggin' weird. Okay, whatever. Can you go get us beer? So the innkeeper takes the jug back, he dumps out the malt, he fills it once again with beer, and when it gets back to the table, this time it's filled with acorns. Now the three guys at the table are convinced that the innkeeper is playing a joke or screwing with them or something, and the innkeeper is convinced that the four people at the table are screwing with him. So once again, the innkeeper, he goes and he dumps out the acorns and he fills it with the finest beer and brings it back to the table. And this third time they make it to the table and it's a liquid. However, when they go to drink it, they realize that this liquid is blood. Now at this point, everybody is freaked out and horrified, except for the maid. She's just sitting there with kind of a smirk on her face. And they're like, what is the reason of all of this? And the maid calmly explains that this is an omen of the next year. It will yield much grain, plenty of fruit on the trees, but it will also breed war and pestilence. She then vanishes into thin air before all three of these guys. And obviously the innkeeper and I guess everybody else in this tavern or inn or whatever. And then right after she vanishes, Danger Zone starts playing in the background because it's my story and that sounds freaking epic. And this story has all the early hallmarks of those vanishing hitchhiker myths. But we don't want to hear stories about a bunch of old fogies 400 years ago. So let's jump to the 20th century and get into the stories we really want to hear. And I'm going to start with Resurrection Mary. Now, I was originally going to start with the Waldheim Flapper and recap that one, but you can listen to it back in season 2. That is personally my favorite one, but it's a standalone segment because of that, so it deserves some love. Go listen to it. But Resurrection Mary, she also resides in Chicago, and she particularly resides along the roadsides of Archer Avenue. So it all starts at the Willowbrook Ballroom in Willow Springs, Illinois, along Archer Avenue. Now this ballroom, it was founded in 1921 during the height of the Jazz Age. And it's often cited that it's the last place that Resurrection Mary was found dancing before her tragic death. Now, it's said that on the night of her death, Mary, who was this smoking hot, skinny, blonde-haired, blue-eyed chick with massive you-know-whats, got in a fight with her lover, and he storms out of the ballroom and he drives off into the night, and Mary is forced to walk home along Archer Avenue, and during this walk it starts raining. So Mary's walking home in the rain. She's wearing nothing but a thin shawl, dancing shoes, and this little clutch purse that she has. And cars of this era had like bullshit headlights and like no safety features. So while she's walking down Archer Avenue in the rain, this car just loses control and bam, plows right into her, kills her instantly. Tragic death. So she ends up getting buried in Archer Cemetery. However, her soul does not rest because most nights, especially on rainy nights, she can be seen still walking down Archer Avenue, still wearing that beautiful white dress and those matching dancing shoes, looking for a ride home. Now, we actually know of the first reported sighting of Resurrection Mary. It takes place in 1939. It was this guy named Jerry Pallas, who was a Chicago Southsider. He states that he met Mary at the Liberty Grove and Hall at 47th and Mozart. This was another dance hall that she possibly frequented and probably haunts. Because normally these ghosts, these spirits, they'll stick to places and haunt places where they had the best times of their life sometimes. It's kind of their version of heaven. But Jerry, on this night in 1939, he meets her there. He says that they danced and they even kissed, and she asked him for a ride home. And as they get onto Archer Avenue and they're driving down it, as soon as they pass Resurrection Cemetery, boom, she vanishes. He never sees her again. And this is common with the Resurrection Mary myth, and it has a lot of strong links to the Waldheim Flapper myth as well. It's usually a young girl or an apparition of a girl who meets a guy at a dance hall, and as they're driving her home, she disappears from the vehicle, normally in front of the cemetery in which she is buried. Now, another account in 1973 states that she showed up at Harlow's nightclub on Cicero Avenue in Chicago's southwest side, and the same kind of story plays out. She meets a guy, the guy offers her a lift home, and as they pass by Resurrection Cemetery, she disappears. That same year, a cab driver came into Chet's Melody Lodge, which is literally right across the street from Resurrection Cemetery. And Chet's Melody Lounge is actually pretty cool, so it's right across the street from Resurrection Cemetery. And every Sunday night, they prepare a Bloody Mary and place it at the end of the bar, and that Bloody Mary is for Mary of Resurrection Mary fame. However, they say to this day she's never come to claim her drink, possibly because she's just waiting for that right person to accompany her and then give her a ride back home. But I digress. So this cabbie, he picks up this beautiful blonde-haired, blue-eyed, tiny little woman with, the biggest, if you're a guy, you know what I'm talking about. So he picks her up and he's giving her a ride, and once they hit Resurrection Cemetery, she disappears. Now, he suspects that she fled into the lounge, and he's looking around for her, and he's like, I had this passenger, she was this chick, she was blonde hair, blue-eyed, blah, 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 and she didn't pay her fare, and I'm looking for her, and they're like, dude, that sounds like Resurrection Mary, but she didn't come in here tonight, she hasn't touched her Bloody Mary. Then all of a sudden, this dusty old jukebox that nobody's touched in 10 years mysteriously kicks on, and for some reason, Danger Zone starts playing. Now, for that joke, I was originally going to go with Sing, Sing, Sing by Benny Goodman, but I don't think many people know that song, so Danger Zone works. Now, other sightings of Resurrection Mary don't involve her actually being in the car or hitchhiking at all. These sightings come from motorists who are just driving past Resurrection Cemetery or down Archer Avenue, and they just almost hit this woman. It's usually a rainy night and the guy is driving home and he's usually alone in the car, and this woman just steps out into the street and he swerves and he almost hits her, and she disappears the second they get out of the car to check on her. They look around all crazy for this possible girl that they hit, but they never find her. And then Danger Zone starts playing on the car stereo. Because that song is timeless, it shows up everywhere throughout history, so that's my conspiracy theory I'm creating. But these particular sightings show up in 1976, 1978, 1980, and 1989. And Resurrection Mary becomes a staple in Chicago's urban legend scene. So we've already seen two different variations of the myth. One variation is it's usually a mysterious traveler who has some kind of prophecy, and another variation is it's the ghost or the phantom of somebody who was tragically killed along the roadways, who's apparently stuck in some kind of time loop maybe. And there are other variants around the world, some involving gods. So for example, in Hawaii, on the big island of Hawaii, it's said that the goddess Pele will do this. She will travel the roads of the big island incognito, usually disguised as an old woman or something, and she will reward helpful travelers who will pick her up and offer her a ride. She usually divulges some kind of prophecy to the traveler who picked her up, and then as they approach their destination, she mysteriously disappears. And there are thousands of other variations on that very same story as well. Some of them date back even further than the original Vanishing Hitchhiker story I talked about at the beginning. These usually involve local gods. However, the Resurrection Mary version of the myth seems to be the most dominant one. And we even see a variant of this same myth show up in modern Japan post the 2011 Fukushima disaster. So just a quick recap for those who don't remember, on March 11th, 2011, an undersea megathrust earthquake, which had a magnitude of 9.0, occurred off the coast of Oshika Peninsula of Tohoku. Sorry, Japanese listeners, I know I probably butchered that. But this earthquake sets off this mega tsunami, which ends up damaging key equipment at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. And this essentially causes the power plant to go into meltdown, and it's the worst nuclear meltdown since the 1986 meltdown at Chernobyl in Ukraine. However, as a result of all of this, primarily the tsunami, 15,894 people tragically lost their lives that day, and the area has struggled to recover ever since. A lot of neighborhoods in the exclusion zone, for example, continue to be abandoned to this very day. But here's where things take kind of an odd turn into urban legend. So it started coming out in the summer of 2011. A lot of cab drivers were coming out with these odd stories. And these cab drivers were working in Ishinomaki, which is, I think, a city in that same prefecture where all this happened. They started experiencing vanishing hitchhikers. So one cab driver, he described a woman wearing a coat entering his cab near Ishinomaki station and asking him to go to Minamihama district. At this time, the driver replies that area is almost empty. Is that okay? To which the woman simply replied, "Have I died?" At that point, the driver turns around confused, only to find an empty back seat. Another driver, he stated that a male passenger asked to be taken to Hiroyama, and upon reaching that destination, the cab driver states that the passenger simply disappears. And at least 5 other cab drivers have similar stories. So we ask ourselves, well, what's really going on here? Well, it was a tragic event where a lot of people suddenly and quickly died. So these might be the spirits of people who don't know that they are dead. However, who knows, maybe getting to their destination allows them to move on into that next realm or whatever. However, in other cases, like Resurrection Mary, for example, or the Waldheim Flapper, or the 1,000 other variants all around the United States and the world, I think it might just be tragic history playing on a loop. Or it could be a spirit or entity that's just kind of stuck, haunting the place where they last experienced life, and playing out those last events of their last night on Earth in this ghostly loop. Or hell, who knows, maybe it's just a good story to tell on a scary night. Now, I can't discount these people's experiences. These people experience this phenomena, and it exists today in urban legend. So there's obviously something strange happening in these areas on these highways and in the backs of these cars. But I think at the end of the day, the prevalence of the story, the general story that we all hear, simply comes down to the fact that we sometimes don't know when we're interacting with a ghost or a spirit, or hell, even a god or goddess in disguise. So it might hit upon some kind of central core, especially when you're a traveler. That idea of be kind of those who you interact with, because it could be rewarding or detrimental to your future. But I don't know, to be honest, it's a basic story that is actually really tough to find local variants of without just repeating myself over and over again. And I admit, yes, this is a short episode and I recorded it completely drunk, so even with editing, it's gonna sound like garbage. But as I always say, it's my show, I can do whatever I want. And speaking of the show, as always, this is Mike. I thank you for listening. There's only one more episode left before the season finale. I've been working extremely hard on that over the last few weeks, so I hope you enjoy it. As always, you can follow me on the socials, Instagram, Facebook, Threads. Follow it and give it 5 stars on Spotify, or just keep following it on whatever platform you're listening to it on. Apparently, iHeartRadio is very popular amongst my listeners. I did not know that until recently. And as always, if you're interested in supporting the show monetarily, you can always click that link in the description of every episode. And you can kick me a few bucks, which I can invest in, I don't know, creating merch or something. But as always, once again, this is Mike. I thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.